In the second part of our lecture, we want to take a look at the rise of the Roman and the Han empires. And so one tool that we want to be able to utilize is the preset chart that you've been doing at home. So chapters 4 through 7, you should be extracting and finding as much evidence as you possibly can from the reading in each of the various preset categories for both Rome and China. And with the ability to be able to answer the question, the process of imperial consolidation and expansion. And so in your homework assignment, hopefully you're taking bullet points, and in this case, one of them, and be able to explain the rise of these empires. And so with that, keep that in mind as you do the reading at home and also in the scope of this lecture as well. Today we're going to take a look at the rise of two classical empires. By classical, I mean both Western and Eastern civilization look backwards to these empires because they form some of the key institutions, ideas, and philosophies that are still used in this modern age as well. So first of all, we want to be able to, and as you examine the contents of this lecture and the subsequent parts of this lecture, you want to be able to fill out the lecture discussion section. And so if you find ideas, you want to be able to identify what that piece of evidence is and either explain how it brings together the empire, imperial consolidation and imperial expansion. So keep that in mind as we go through the process of the lecture. But we're going to start off here with discussing the geography of both Rome and the Han dynasty and how that in the end helps for either one of these guys to build their empires. And as it turns out, both of these empires are actually contemporaries. They existed at around the same time. There weren't any direct connections between the two. People might have known or heard from stories about the existence of each one, but they didn't have direct contact like we have today, where nation states are associated with others. But let's go and start off with Rome, and particularly the geographic luck that was necessary for these empires to be built. And part of that luck happens to be the vibrant agricultural base that exists in both of these empires. In Rome, they had a Mediterranean climate that existed, of course, in the Mediterranean. So warm, a little bit humid, but also will provide enough rain for agriculture and a lot of sunshine as well, very much like here in California. So we see the development initially of the independent farmers being able to grow cereal crops, particularly wheat, in order to generate a surplus. But eventually, as the empire expands to be much larger, and particularly in Rome, it was situated in the Mediterranean. And we talked about the importance of maritime travel, the ability for them to be able to ship goods from point A to point B. And so eventually you start to get specialized region. Egypt will grow wheat, and in the Italian peninsula, you see them growing cash crops like olives and grapes, which can be made into olive oil and wine. Two ways to be able to preserve agricultural products for a long time, to be able to ship them from place to place and to keep in the store as well. And so the climate and topography creates a very vibrant agricultural base in Rome. Not only that, but the Roman Empire is able to generate revenue to support the armies, bureaucrats, and others through the process of taxation. And in Rome, they utilize a program called tax farming. Now, what tax farming is you're not getting government officials in order to collect taxes. They don't come from the center. They don't come from Rome itself here, but instead you get locals to do the task for you. And so you would have them collect, let's say, for example, this amount of taxes, and anything that they extract that's over the requirement, the tax collectors themselves, the tax farmers, will keep that extra. And so oftentimes these tax farmers are some of the most hated people within the empire because they're in some ways seen as loyalists to Rome and not their local region, and of course they're collecting taxes at the cost of everybody else. But either way, it's a way for Rome to very easily collect taxes from a very vibrant agricultural base. Same thing with China. China itself has a number of geographic advantages that will help to secure itself as an empire. The first of which is geographic isolation. Oceans to the south, oceans to the east, Himalayas to the west. Only place where you might find entry is going to be in the north. Okay? But what it allows for China to do is to be more or less stable from external invasion. And so you see the rise of long-standing dynasties because they have that environmental protection of only one major place to protect. Not only that, but we've seen in previous discussions here in the last unit, it's agricultural base. And so you see the rise of agriculture, particularly in the Yellow and the Yangtze rivers, and eventually further south in the wet and humid regions where they're able to grow that famous crop of rice as well. And is aided by new technologies such as just the chain pump, iron tools, and the wheelbarrow that allowed for things like terrace farming to actually occur, right? Farming in these hillsides and so forth. Right? And what that generates, like we see in the Roman Empire, a powerful tax base. Right? And the Han Dynasty particularly favored independent farmers. So instead of these big aristocratic land holdings where farmers are tenants and where a lot of it is extracted and given to the lords and the nobles, instead there's independent farmers that are going to work harder on their own lands, but then also you get to directly tax them without any middlemen as well. Right? And so state tax collectors, these very powerful scholar gentry and other bureaucrats, will collect the taxes that is necessary for the revenue in building a state. Okay? So we have the environmental advantage for both Rome and the Han Dynasty. Not only that, the next part we want to take a look at is the history of Rome and the Han Dynasty. We'll start off with the Roman Empire because it is a long-standing history that will help us to understand how the empire came to be and some of the values that existed in Rome. Okay, so let's start off with Rome, okay, because it is has a unique introduction into the world. Now, just like any other city-state, there's usually a king or a set of ruling families. Now, Rome developed a little bit differently in that it was a republic, meaning there are citizens who elect officials to power. And so very early on in Rome's history, a collection of independent farmers and also some of the ruling noble families were able to decide that they're going to select leaders, representatives, to formulate a ruling senate. So instead of one body, you have a number of senators that would make decisions based on voting, based on the structures and institutions that they've built up. Okay? In fact, once they've created this Senate and ruling over the Republic, they have a tendency to hate the notion of kingships. In fact, kings are seen as tyrants, right? Awful rulers and so forth. This is really seen in the story of Cincinnatus, whereby in an emergency, he was granted dictatorial powers. But once the crisis was over, Cincinnatus was called to be king by many people. And instead of taking on that power, Cincinnatus instead let go of that power and went back to his farm. And in doing so, created sort of this legacy whereby kings were not accepted. They're not the right thing for Rome. And that value was really highlighted within the scope of the Republic. The Republic itself was not equal. There were elites known as the patricians, and there were common citizens known as the plebeians. But even so, despite the unequal system, both patricians and plebeians work together. There are checks and balances in this system where both are represented. The elites got more than the common citizens, but yet the common citizens' rights were protected through the Senate and through the laws that they were able to create as well. So class-based politics. This system worked. Citizens felt as if they had the ability to be able to protect themselves, and they fought for the Republic, and not just in its defense, but also in its expansion as well. And so eventually Rome would grow not just into the Italian peninsula, but eventually into modern-day Spain, modern-day France, and even modern-day North Africa, as it defeated a maritime empire known as Carthage to really win dominance over the entire Mediterranean world. But as the Roman Republic expanded out further, the citizen soldiers found themselves farther and farther away from home, and many of them weren't able to go home for the harvest, and eventually many of them lost their farms and had to sell them, entered into debt. And so as a result of this, they relied on, for survival, their generals. And many of these generals started to have a much higher view of themselves, and many of them became very ambitious, including a man by the name of Julius Caesar, who, in an attempt to try to create a new empire based on his rule, was assassinated by senators who feared that he was going to take over as a dictator, and that unleashed a massive civil war that in the end would be won by, as it turns out, Caesar's adopted son, a man by the name of Octavian. Octavian wins the civil war after decades of infighting and lack of peace. And as a result of this, Octavian comes back and he has ambitions to be an emperor, a king. But he understanding that this society does not value tyrants whatsoever. And so instead of declaring himself emperor, he did a number of things that would eventually elevate him to the stance of emperor without necessarily saying that he's going to do so. And so he's going to call himself, on one hand, the Principate, or the first citizen, first among equals. It's just to say, look, he's important, but he's still a citizen of Rome just like everybody else. He's also going to adopt the title, the name Caesar, since that is his father's name, and eventually that is going to have meaning as king. He's going to be given the term Augusta, which contrasts with the term humanus. Thus, he's not necessarily human. He's not a god. Somewhere in between, implying that he is superior to other men without calling himself a god. He's also going to command the primary armies of Rome, the large, powerful ones in the frontiers, in Egypt, in the eastern part of the empire as well. And so he's given the title High Commander par excellence, in other words, the Imperator. And then finally, he will be given the title son of a god, again, almost like he is beyond human status. And so as a result of this, Octavian is going to try to change the notion of his idea, his position as first citizen, to evolve into, slowly, into an emperor. And he does this not just simply by these titles, but by other means. And so what you're going to do is take a look at the documents regarding Caesar Augustus. So take a look at those particular documents and explain how, in the end, Octavian does this. And then from there, we'll continue with the lecture at another time.